Okay, everyone, welcome back. Hello again. So let's go ahead and start. Start with a motivation, generate a bodhicitta motivation. So happy Lapa Duchen, everyone. So remember, every karmic action we commit today, we perform today is multiplied by hundreds of millions of times. So it's especially worthwhile to generate very positive motivation for this session and yeah, engage in some virtuous activity. Okay, so generate a bodhicitta motivation. Yeah, in order to benefit all sentient beings, then I myself must quickly become enlightened. For that reason, then I'll engage in this, this session. Yeah, today the His Holiness presentation. I was wondering yesterday why His Holiness finished the text, commentary on awakening mind yesterday instead of finishing it today. But then we could see that this morning His Holiness wanted to spend, his part of the hour and a half, the first 45 minutes, on going through these kind of essential verses. Well, His Holiness wanted to make, first of all, lead us all in making an offering of practice to the Buddha, or remembering the Buddha by reflecting on impermanence, emptiness, and bodhicitta, or conventional bodhicitta. So His Holiness first explained, some verses that His Holiness almost, quotes every teaching. Some by Nagarjuna, some by Chandrakirti, two by Aryadeva, on emptiness and dependent arising, how to meditate. And then His Holiness really explained each verse quite a bit, actually. So I put those verses together in our little document here to look at. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. And then His Holiness explained just a few verses on bodhicitta, or conventional bodhicitta, and then we meditated for about half a minute on bodhicitta. Yeah, and then His Holiness took questions. Right? So since we only got through half the text yesterday, what I'm hoping to do together today is first we'll go through those verses on emptiness that His Holiness explained, and then spend a little time meditating on emptiness together, and then go through the few verses on bodhicitta, and we'll spend a little time meditating on bodhicitta, and then see how much time we have, and maybe we can go through more of the actual text by Nagarjuna, and maybe we can even finish going through that today. And then, of course, if you have any questions, you can address your questions. So, okay, so the text that I've been, where I'm compiling all the different verses that His Holiness quotes, I've uploaded again the newest version, updated from this morning. in the Google Drive, which the link, yeah, you can find either in the chat box here, or if you're looking on YouTube or Facebook, it should be there in the chat room at some point. Yeah, so we'll look at that first. Yeah, I guess just to say something about these verses before I start explaining them, actually, is I mean, these are really important verses, basically. If we're, if we consider ourselves students of His Holiness, followers of His Holiness, these verses, His Holiness says again and again and again that he himself uses these to, contemplate, recite, meditate on every day. And he's even, almost maybe 8 years ago or so in Dripung Loseling, His Holiness actually had a bunch of them printed out on paper and gave out the papers, had the papers given out to the audience. I don't know, maybe Kunben was there. Some of you might have been there. It was at it was at Drepung. It's called the Tsokchen. It's like the Lachi of Drepung, the main temple at Drepung. One morning, His Holiness gave one initiation, Pelden Lamo initiation, and then he handed it out that time. And he asked everyone in the audience to meditate on those verses. So almost every teaching His Holiness gives, he quotes these verses and comments how he himself meditates on them every day, and how as Buddhist practitioners, our main practice should be, he recommends, a main practice be meditate a little bit on emptiness and bodhicitta every day, and that these verses are an excellent basis for doing that. So yeah, so they're very important. Yeah, I think even more important than like offering prostrations or offering water bowls, and stuff every day, is to make the offering a practice to the teacher. And the best way, as the students of His Holiness, for sure, the best way is to pay attention, use these verses in your daily practice. Yeah, so then without further ado, then let's look at the actual verses. Okay. Document on day 3, that's today. So first, His Holiness spoke about some lines from the Heart Sutra. Right? His Holiness gives these verses in different orders, right, in different times. So there's actually, I meant to mention, there's another document in there's another document I uploaded to the Google Drive called, what is it called? Something like Verses His Holiness, something very creative like that. It's called Verses Given by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Yeah, so that's another document I just uploaded to Google Drive just before the session. So that's most of these verses that we're going to go through today are all there in that one. And that kind of follows more the order that His Holiness, that was in the paper that His Holiness gave out in Dripung that time. But they're mostly the same verses. Okay, so here I've organized by, okay, first, so day 3 today, verses to use for meditation on emptiness, right? So first, His Holiness began with His Holiness always talks about, and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So here and just here also, there also. So this is in, the first part is, occurs twice, right? And beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So this is at the very beginning of the Heart Sutra, where it says Buddha is absorbed in the concentration on the profound, I think like the enumeration of all phenomena or something like that. And then Avalokiteshvara is absorbed in the concentration on the profound perfection of wisdom. And at that time, he beheld those 5 aggregates. So what are the 5 aggregates? Those 5 aggregates: form, feeling, compositional factors. Form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. So he beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So because it says also, there must be something else, right? But it doesn't mention directly in the Heart Sutra what that other thing is. So His Holiness always says that what that means is not only did Avalokiteshvara was he meditating on the 5 aggregates as being empty of inherent existence, but he was also meditating on the person who is imputed on the 5 aggregates as being empty of inherent existence. So therefore, that also shows that Avalokiteshvara was meditating not only on the selflessness of phenomena, right? So when we observe the 5 aggregates, the form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness, when we observe all of those or any of those, because those are not a person, right? They're something other than a person. So when we observe our 5 aggregates or any one of them, or external phenomena as well, and we meditate on those being empty of an inherent existent self, or on their emptiness of inherent existence, or on their emptiness of existing from their own side, at that time we're meditating on selflessness of phenomena, right? Because the aggregates are phenomena other than a person, right? But so this also is showing that at the time Avalokiteshvara was observing the aggregates, and it's not clear about which aggregates, his own aggregates, or you can also consider, the external world, the physical things in the external world as being part of the form aggregate. There's actually the internal aggregates and external aggregates. So like our body, our physical body, because it's conjoined with our mental continuum, is part of our person, then it's an internal form aggregate. But external phenomena, like my mug and the table and your laptop and so forth, those are external form aggregates. But whatever the case, Avalokiteshvara is observing some of the aggregates, and meditating on those being empty of inherent existence. So that's meditation on the selflessness of phenomena. But this also indicates that as well, he's observing the person himself or another person, and meditating on the person being also empty of inherent existence, selflessness of persons, right? So there's both the selflessness of phenomena and the selflessness of persons. The second line, it comes when Avalokiteshvara is explaining to Shariputra how to practice the perfection of wisdom. And so he just repeats, he says what he was doing. You should look, so he's talking to Shariputra, saying you should look upon it like this, correctly and actually, I think he says like the, what is it, Rikibumo, what he said, the sons and daughters of the lineage should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So that also again shows the selflessness of persons in addition to the selflessness of phenomena. So His Holiness was kind of commenting here how do we meditate on emptiness then? Well, yeah, first of all, you take the person. What was he commenting here actually? No, here he was just making that point, which I just made. I think it wasn't. We'll go into more detail and not how to meditate on emptiness actually just below. So then it's saying in the Heart Sutra, it also says the form is empty. Emptiness is other than form. Emptiness is not other than, sorry, form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. So here he's making the point that that form, which is a conventional phenomenon, is dependent upon its emptiness of inherent existence, right? And the emptiness of inherent existence of form is also dependent upon form. They're one entity, but different isolates. So they're part of one entity. So think about just like well, let's say for well, you can think of, I mean, one example, there's many different examples of things that are one entity but different isolates, right? So for example, look at your own mind. or you're, say, how do you feel? Someone asks you, how do you feel now? Whether you're happy or sad or excited or bored or whatever. So we have a feeling, you know, I feel like this. So that feeling that we have, that's part of us, right? That's how we feel. It's something that describes us. It's a quality that we have. It's a quality of us. So how we feel, whether it's happy or sad or bored or excited or whatever, that is one entity with us as a person, right? So us, the person, me, and my feelings, they're one entity, right? But I am not my feelings. My feelings are not me. The way I feel right now is not me. I also am not the way I feel right now, right? But yet those two things, they're different things. So they're different isolates, but they're part of one entity. And without, you know, feeling the way I do, I wouldn't be who I am right now at this moment, right? And without me, the person, the way I feel, it also wouldn't exist, right? They depend upon each other, right? So just like that, form, without its emptiness of inherent existence, it couldn't exist, right? It would be something totally different than what it is. And the emptiness of inherent existence of form, without form, it wouldn't exist either, right? Because it's a property of form. Form is the basis for its existence. So this is showing how form and its emptiness of inherent existence. So this is the case for anything that exists. It and its emptiness of inherent existence, they're one entity and they mutually depend upon each other, and they don't exist separately from one another. So form is empty. So here it's form is empty of inherent existence. Emptiness, that emptiness is, so it's, I mean, you can't take the words literally, right? Because you have to interpret a little bit. Form is empty. Empty of what? Empty of inherent existence is what they're talking about. And then when it says emptiness is form, it's not the case that emptiness is a physical thing, right? Is materially established. Rather, it's saying that emptiness is one nature with form. You have to interpret it like that, right? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So emptiness is one nature with form. And then, documents open. Emptiness is not other than form. So again, you have to interpret it, because emptiness is something other than form, right? Emptiness is different than form. Emptiness is not form. So it is something other than form, but it's not inherently other, is one way to interpret it. It's not like if emptiness was in, I mean, so here we're not talking about emptiness in general. We're talking about form's property of being empty of inherent existence. That property is not a different nature, right? It's not an other nature from form, or it doesn't exist independently from form. In that way, it's not other. It is something different, but it's not a different entity. Or, it's not totally unrelated. That's another way to think about it. And then form is also not other than emptiness. So here, actually, form is something different from emptiness, right? So what does it mean? It means form is not a totally independent nature from emptiness. Form is not totally independent or separate from emptiness, but rather, or it means its own emptiness of inherent existence, but rather it's part of the same nature. So yeah, that's what it's. That's the first little set of quotations, both from the Heart Sutra. And then His Holiness quoted these two verses by Nagarjuna from the Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, further reinforcing this idea that it's because things are dependently originated or dependent arisings that they are empty of inherent existence, right? Mainly that, and that is the middle way, right? So whatever is dependently arisen. So is there anything in the world that's not dependently arisen? No. This is the short answer. If you think there is something, then please you point it out to me and give me the reasons why you think it's not dependently arisen, whatever you might think is not. So whatever is dependently arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. So here again, we have to interpret, right? So like, my mug, again, do you remember from yesterday? There it is. In the meantime, so yeah, my mug is it emptiness? Yes, the mug is emptiness. Remember, emptiness is ultimate truth, right? The mug is empty of inherent existence, yes. But is the mug emptiness? No, no, it's not, right? Because it's a conventional truth. So then what is this saying here? What is Nagarjuna saying here? Whatever is dependently arisen, so does that include my mug, right? Is my mug dependently arisen? Yes, definitely. It hasn't been there since beginningless time. Someone had to take clay and then clean it and then, you know, form it into a nice shape and then bake it and so forth. All these things. So many things to do to get this mug. It's not easy. So whatever is dependently arisen, so my mug is dependently arisen, that is explained to be emptiness. So is my mug explained to be emptiness? No, of course not. So what does that mean? It means that is explained to be empty of inherent existence. We have to interpret, right? That is explained to be empty of inherent existence. So yeah, everything that's dependently arisen is empty of inherent existence. Means, because, I mean, here it helps to, I mean, again and again and again, we have to think about what does it mean to be inherently existent. I think that's something that I know in my own case for many years, that's something that was lacking, was putting real effort into trying to imagine, like, you know, if something inherently existed, if things did exist from their own side, what does that mean? What does that entail? What would that world be like? What would that kind of object be like, right? So the easiest way to get a clear idea of that is like, it's kind of, well, we kind of have to do like, you know, like walking a mile in another person's shoes, like really stepping into someone else's shoes in a way. Because, yeah, kind of because actually the way, I mean, the way we experience, the way the world exists is that nothing is inherently existent. And yet the way we perceive it is as if things are. So we kind of miss the story of like, if things really were inherent existence, what would that actually be like? What would that mean? So how do we get an idea of that is by looking at the opposite of inherent existence, right? And then looking at the opposite of that, right? So we have to do a kind of double negative. So what is the opposite of, so hold on. First, what are some synonyms with inherent existence, inherently existent? Remember, I've been saying a lot again and again and again, right? Existing from its own side is the same thing. Something inherently exists means it exists from its own side. It means also it exists through the force of its own characteristics, right? It's another kind of synonym. Also, it means things exist by their own nature, right? They exist by the force of their own nature. Or you could think they, yeah, those are the main ones. Yeah, so then what's the opposite of that, right? Of all those things, take all those together: inherently existent, existing from its own side, existing by the force of its own characteristics, or some translators put characteristically established, which I find very difficult to make sense of, or existing by its own entity or by its own power. So take all those things together, try to imagine, what we're doing is trying to imagine what does that mean. So then let's look at, well, and I guess one more adjective I'll throw in is to exist independently, right? Independent existence is another synonym that goes with all those. So then what's the opposite of all those? Dependent origination, right? That's the opposite. Things existing as dependent arisings. So let's look at that now. What does it mean for things to be dependent originations, dependently arising phenomena? Well, just think about my mug. I mean, a very simple example. Sometimes we make things so complicated. It's not necessary. Just we try to keep things simple, right? So take a simple example. What does it mean that this mug is dependently arisen? One, It means it exists in dependence upon parts, right? It has a bottom, it has a rim, it has a handle, it has glaze and dye, it has all the clay, you know, and all the particles, all the atoms that make it up. And then there's even the empty space inside the mug. Without the empty space inside the mug, it couldn't function as a mug, right? And then there's its texture, its color, its shape. All those are different parts of the mug, right? So, and the mug is not any of those parts. None of those parts are the mug itself. Ooh, Felipe, did you want me to record? You didn't remind me.
No, don't worry about it, Venerable. I'm recording and streaming at the same time, so it's okay. Plus, when you record, I only get the grid view, and it's better to have you on the speaker view.
Oh, yeah, I know. I like grid view, so I can see all my friends here. All right. So, yeah, so is the mug any of its parts? You know, is the mug the handle? No, because whatever is the mug has to possess all of those parts, right? And any of the parts, they don't possess all the parts, right? So the handle, it doesn't have the base, it doesn't have a lip, right? The lip of the mug, it doesn't have a base, it doesn't have a handle. So whatever is the mug has to be the thing that possesses all of those parts. Any of those parts cannot be that kind of thing, right? Because they're just one of the parts. So the mug exists independent upon parts. So, okay, so let's go back to what does it mean to be inherently existent? So what's the opposite of having parts? Not having parts. Oh, see, it's not that complicated. You know, I mean, one kind of dependent arising means things exist independent upon parts, and everything exists in that way. So this is another little challenge for you. Can you find something that does not have parts? Anything. Think of anything in the universe and try to find me something that doesn't have parts. Dilshad's saying like, no way. But you know, you have to kind of, yeah, I mean, we try to have to work at this, you know, to try to actually find something that doesn't have parts. So you might think of like, I don't know, the whole universe or time or, you know, some very abstract thing like the number one. Does the number one have parts? Of course, because you can have 1/2, you know, you can have 0.1 and 0.2. Those are all parts of one. You can divide one into half and into quarters and so forth. But anyway, you have to try to think of different things that might have parts. Some people like to say like, well, maybe my mind or my most subtle self, if we're into yourself. Anyway, the Buddhist view is there's nothing that doesn't have parts. Everything is made up of parts. And therefore, everything is a dependent arising in that way, right? That's one way. So then think about, okay, back to what does it mean to inherently exist? Here I'm going off on a big tangent. I didn't plan this at all. I'm not sure it's a good tangent, but anyway, we'll go with it because it'll help you understand all these verses that we're going to talk about. So, so if everything has parts and everything exists independent upon its parts, right? Does my mug exist independent upon its parts? Yes. How do we know that? If I took all the parts away, I wouldn't have a mug anymore, right? And then I'd be really unhappy because I wouldn't have anything to put my tea in. So, okay. So one way of things existing is the independence upon parts. So what is the opposite of that? Not having parts. So, okay, so point number one, if things inherently exist or exist from their own side, it means they have to be partless, right? They cannot be made up of parts, right? So that's really totally contrary to our you know, everyday experience of things. So yeah, so you have to think deeply about that. Why does that mean that if things inherently exist, they cannot have parts? Well, because what it means is, as long as something has parts, it has a relationship with its parts, right? It exists through the power of its parts. It exists by the force of its parts existing. It means separately, apart from, or in isolation from its parts, the thing cannot exist. So therefore, it's not independent, right? But rather, it depends upon other things, whatever has parts. And then another kind of, so then let's go back to dependent arising. Another kind of dependent arising, which I'm sure you all know, is dependence upon causes and conditions. So what does that mean? It means that, so again, my mug arises from causes and conditions. What does that mean? It means before the mug existed, there were other things that were not this mug, like clay and glaze and a kiln and a potter and the idea in someone's mind to make a mug, or the intention. So all those different, and water, right, and fire. So all those different causes and conditions, they come together in a certain way, and then someone produced this mug. This mug is produced. So this mug exists in dependence upon those causes and conditions. So again, so what would the opposite of that be like? If the mug was inherently existent, what would that mean? It would mean the mug would have to somehow come into existence without being related to those causes and conditions in any way, without relying on those causes and conditions, without having contact with those causes and conditions, in isolation, from its own side. Remember, from its own side would mean the mug comes into existence by its own power, without depending upon anything else. But nothing exists like that, right? And it would also mean not only the mug, it depends upon, well, if the mug inherently existed, it would mean not only can it have no relationship with other things, in that those things cause the mug, right? But it can also have no relationship with other things, in that those things are products of the mug. So it would mean I cannot drink from the mug, right? Because as soon as I drink from the mug, or anyone drinks from the mug, or you put liquid in the mug or whatever, that those experiences are effects of the mug, right? So if the mug existed, and as soon as the mug produces an effect, actually the mug changes. It becomes something else. So because it changes from the thing that had not produced that effect, the thing that, you know, someone did not drink from, to the thing that someone drank from, right? The thing that had produced an effect, it changes. So that change is dependent upon interaction with other things. So if the mug inherently existed through its own side, then however it exists, in whatever way it exists, that cannot have any effect, any relationship with anything else. Because as soon as the mug has a relationship with other things, whether it's something that's produced by other things, or whether it is the mug itself is an effect that produces or alters other things, it has a relationship with those things, and therefore the way it exists, what it is not, you know, as soon as something is an effect of causes or is a cause of other effects, then what that thing is no longer, it no longer is that thing in isolation from other things or from its own side, right? As long, you know, as soon as I drink the mug, then the mug is a mug that Legtsok just drank from. And it being a mug that Legtsok just drank from is dependent upon Legtsok, right? The mug is not something that Legtsok drank from the side of the mug. So that's another way that inherent existence just doesn't make any sense, you know, for things to exist in that way. Okay, let's go back to this verse then. So whatever is dependently arisen, that is explained to be emptiness, means empty of inherent existence. That being a dependent designation. So that is a big question mark, right? What is that? What is this that refer to? Usually it's typically explained that that refers to emptiness, the emptiness here in this line. So, so emptiness being a dependent designation is itself the middle way. So not only, you know, conventional phenomena, which not only conventional phenomena are empty of inherent existence, but the very emptiness of inherent existence is also a dependent designation. It's also a dependently arisen phenomenon in the way I just described above in relation. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is also not other than form. Right? So emptiness itself depends upon other things. So this itself is the middle way. So what does the middle way mean? You know, just like if you walk down a road, you walk down the middle of the road, you're neither on the left shoulder or on the right side, right? So you're in between two extremes, two sides. So if you're walking on like a balance beam or a narrow bridge, that's very important, right? Because otherwise you get hurt. So as sentient beings in samsara, we don't want to get hurt any more than necessary, right? So how do you follow the middle way in terms of the view of emptiness? What are the two extremes? Again, just like walking down the middle of the road, you're not on the left or the right extreme. Then in terms of the view, what are the two extremes? The middle way, that's free of the two extremes, is free from the extreme of nihilism, which many people fall into. No? You see many people, especially, they first start learning about emptiness, they tend to think nothing exists, right? So nihilism is the idea that nothing exists, or the holding the view that nothing exists at all. So that's one extreme. So dependent arising protects us from, by proving or establishing that things are empty of existing from their own side, in dependence upon the reason that things are dependent arisings. When we recognize that things are dependent arisings, that prevents us from falling into the extreme view that things do not exist, right? Because of course, you know, if my mug depends upon parts, as soon as when I realize the mug exists independence upon parts or independence upon causes and conditions, then I know it exists. There's no question about it existing, right? And then, so the reason of dependent arising protects us from the extreme of nihilism, non-existence, and seeing that, you know, things exist independence upon parts and independence upon causes and conditions and independence upon mental imputation as well. That protects us from the other extreme of permanence, it's called, the extreme of permanence, which actually means grasping at things as existing inherently or from their own side, or independent, having independent existence. So when we see that things exist by depending upon things that are not them, other things, then that protects us from grasping at things having their own inherent existence, existing in and of themselves or from their own side. So that's how the view of dependent arising is the middle way, basically shows us the middle way. Then because there is nothing whatsoever that is not dependently arisen, therefore there is nothing whatsoever that is not empty of inherent existence. Right? So that's quite self-explanatory. And then, His Holiness just briefly mentioned this verse, which he's mentioned every day. Most of these verses, His Holiness is quoted every day. Just as the body sense power pervades the body, ignorance is present in all afflictive emotions. So this is one we really need to investigate in our own experience. You know, think about past, times in the past when you had a very clear, obvious afflictive emotion, like anger or jealousy or, kind of diluted, afflicted fear or something. Or, in the future, when you get upset, then look to see, is ignorance present, right? So we have to look at instances when we have afflictive emotions, either in the past or in the present, and then see if ignorance, especially ignorance grasping at an inherently existent person, is it really present there? Because this is saying, just as the body sense power pervades the body, right? So look at your body, your body sense power. What is your body sense power? It's that which gives you the ability to feel hot and cold, to feel pleasure or pain, to feel soft or roughness, right? It's to have physical feelings. So is there anywhere in your body where you don't have a body sense power? I don't think so. Maybe like your teeth, your fingernails, or maybe like in your bones, right in the middle of your big bones, in your hip bones or something. But even, we feel like sometimes we have pain in our bones, we have arthritis or something. What about like the middle of your lungs or something? Yeah, we can have feelings in our lungs. So this ability to, but especially look at the surface of our skin, you know, but so we're just getting a sense of the analogy here, right? So the body sense power, it pervades the entire body. It exists everywhere in the body. So like that, ignorance grasping at inherent existence, it's present in all the afflictive emotions. So what it is saying is any other afflictive emotion that arises, whether it's attachment, you know, jealousy, anger, vengeance, or something, it's pervaded by ignorance, grasping, pervaded by ignorance. So that's something we have to check. We can check in our own experience. And then, so therefore, by overcoming ignorance, by eliminating ignorance, you will also overcome all the afflictive emotions, right? All the other afflictive emotions will be abandoned or will cease to function when, if you can eliminate this ignorance grasping at inherent existence. So that also we can check. You know, sometimes you feel very like attached to maybe like, you know, you missed lunch. It's like, you know, you usually have lunch at say 12 o'clock, but it's already 2 o'clock and you haven't had lunch yet, and you feel very hungry and you smell some, you know, some delicious smells coming from the kitchen, and you're really craving that food. You have attachment. So then at that time, before you go to the kitchen and actually eat, try to meditate on emptiness. You know, first of all, see how does the self arise in that moment. You know, look to see is my, you know, am I grasping at the inherent existence of the food? Am I grasping at the inherent existence of me, the person who's craving the food? And then analyze, do the analysis, which we'll do a little later. But to check where, like the person is supposed to, where do they exist? This person who's craving food, does that person exist in my body somewhere? No. Does it exist in my mind somewhere? No. Does it exist somewhere independently from, outside and separate from my body and mind? No, also. So where does that person exist? How does that person who's craving food, what is that? Where is that person? Then you'll see, you can quite easily see it doesn't exist in the way that it appears, right? So then, and then the other thing to check is, and when our grasping at the inherent existence of the person kind of reduces a little bit through the analysis, does the craving for the food also reduce? I used to think totally, that sounds totally silly. That sounds totally impractical. Like that's not going to happen. But slowly, I mean, in my own little experience, I can see, yeah, it does. I don't know. It's kind of, yeah, it does seem to reduce. I mean, definitely it does reduce. In my own experience, it reduces. I mean, not a lot. Not that I'm very good at meditating on emptiness, not at all. But I mean, I used to think there's two different ways. I mean, there's two different ways an afflictive emotion can be reduced. Like just sticking with this example, if you're hungry and you smell some delicious food and you crave it, you know, you're craving for it. I mean, on one hand, if you do this analysis about where is the person who's craving that food, on the one hand, you're just thinking about something else than the food, right? If you just sit there and think about, oh, what that person's cooking in the kitchen, how delicious it smells, how it's going to be so great when I eat it. If you just sit there and think about the food and eating the food, your craving, of course, is going to increase, right? So, but if you just think about something different, not even emptiness, like, oh, all the other work I have to do this afternoon, or like, oh, how that, you know, I had a conversation with this person this morning, da, 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 da. If you just think about something else, that's also going to cause the craving to reduce, right? Just because you're taking your attention away from the object of attachment. So I used to think that maybe, you know, meditating on emptiness, because when you try to do this analysis about emptiness, well, first of all, you're just thinking about something else than your object of attachment. So maybe that's what causes the attachment to reduce. But yeah, I mean, this is someplace we can experiment. Just try, you know, when you have, for example, attachment or anger arise, try thinking about just something else, not emptiness, something other than the object of your afflictive emotion, and see if and how the afflictive emotion reduces, versus try doing meditation on emptiness of you, the person who feels the afflictive emotion, or the object of the afflictive emotion, and then see if the afflictive emotion reduces, and how. Is the way it reduces any different, you know, between those two? But yeah, I think, yeah, when you meditate in emptiness, there's definitely, it has some unique power in reducing the afflictive emotion that just averting your attention to something else doesn't have. Anyway, then we go on with this. This is Arya Deva speaking here. When dependent, okay, so by overcoming ignorance, you will also overcome all afflictive emotions. When dependent arising is seen, ignorance will not occur, right? So when we see dependent arising clearly, then that leads us to seeing emptiness, and therefore we don't grasp at the opposite, inherent existence, or things existing from their own side. When dependent arising is seen, ignorance will not occur. Therefore, make every effort in every way. Therefore, make effort in every way to realize just this teaching, right? So if you want to be free from suffering, this is what you have to do. This is the teaching to make effort in, right? And then His Holiness quoted this verse again from Nagarjuna. And this is, then there's a whole bunch of other verses, actually, which he just quoted very quickly. Anyway, by exhausting karma and afflictive emotions, one is liberated. Karma and afflictive, so by exhausting karma, yeah, you purify all karma and afflictive emotions, or you eliminate all afflictive emotions, one is liberated from samsara. Where do karma and afflictive emotions come from? Karma and afflictive emotions come from false conceptions, exaggerating things as being pleasant or unpleasant or whatever. Those false conceptions, those come from elaboration of inherent existence. So elaboration here is kind of a key word. Here it means the grasping at inherent existence or existing from its own side. So those come from elaboration of inherent existence. As for elaboration, it is ceased by emptiness or it is ceased in emptiness. So yeah, I don't have time to explain all these verses here, because these are verses His Holiness just kind of throws out, like, right? So, and he throws out a lot of them, more than we can explain in 2 hours. And also you'll get tired. But hold on, there's some questions in the chat room. So I'll jump to the chat room. Okay. Someone just said space. I think you must have written something else before that, but then my internet connection cut out. So yeah, I don't know what that means. And then someone else wrote the brain. Ale, were you guys positing things that don't have parts? I bet you were. Anyway, space.
The brain is a part of the body that you cannot feel.
Ale, oh really? You don't have headaches?
Well, but you're not feeling the actual brain matter. You're feeling the blood vessels or the meninges around the brain. But the brain itself, if you were to poke it, you wouldn't feel it.
Oh, really? Okay.
It has no nociceptors.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I guess that's kind of a good thing then. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, from Archana, question. Could you please, I think organs, maybe space, maybe he meant something that doesn't have parts. Come on, space has parts, There's a space, there's a space in front of you and there's a space behind you, for example. Okay, Archana's question. Could you please explain emptiness based on our mental projection? How are people, trees, etc., mental projections? I understand the adjective, big, the adjectives big, wonderful, etc., that go with phenomena, but get stuck there. Okay, we have a lot of questions coming. I'm gonna get overloaded. Yeah. Okay, Archana. So yeah, so there's a difference between big, wonderful. Let's take delicious. I like the example of delicious. You take like sweet tea, nice Indian chai in North India in the winter. And is that delicious or not? Right? So for someone fresh from off the plane from Japan who's been drinking green tea all their life, they're probably going to think, no, that's not delicious. But for someone who they like Indian chai, they'll think, yes, delicious. So is the tea delicious or not? Clearly, that depends upon the experience and the opinions of the person, right? For one person, it's delicious. For another person, it's not. So clearly, tea from its own side, it's not delicious or not delicious, right? That's something that being delicious or not is something that exists independent upon the person who experiences it, right? And their kind of opinion, the way they experience it. So it's not a property, although what it appears as if from like, if we think, chai, good chai is really delicious, it doesn't appear to us. Does it appear to you as if, delicious is just a projection that you're, putting on the chai, or as if the chai is really, from its own side, the chai itself really is delicious, right? I think, for most of us, I think it looks like, whatever of being delicious, right? So that's one way. So yeah, it's true that kind of emptiness of, say, delicious chai being empty of existing as delicious from its own side, that's a little easier to see than just the chai being empty of existing from its own side, So the chai existing, not existing from its own side is more difficult to see than the chai being empty of being inherently being delicious from its own side, right? There's a difference, right? So how do we so take your example of like a tree or a person. Let's take a person. How are those mental projections? Well, first of all, we're not really saying exactly that people and trees and chai, that they are mental projections, right? We're saying they exist independent upon imputation by the mind, right? There's a little bit of a difference. So what is the difference? First of all, like a mental projection is more like a hallucination. If we have, I don't know, we get really drunk, or we take drugs, or we have a really high fever, or we have schizophrenia or something, and we have hallucinations, and there's things, things that don't exist, like people or sounds, or that don't really exist. They appears to us as if they do. That's really a mental projection, right? But even like in the example of the delicious chai, we do project deliciousness onto the chai. That is a kind of mental projection, right? Also, but like the chai itself, trees, people, other people, they're not just mental projections, but they do exist independent upon mental imputation, right? So so now what does that mean? It means that, like, well, yeah, maybe we stick with a person. So like, well, like, the best example is ourselves as a person. Of all the people, the one we should know the best is, like, as a person, how do we exist independent upon mental imputation? Well, you think about as a person, do you feel you? My name is Legtsok. Where am I? I'm here. How am I feeling? I can look at. So we have this whole idea. We have this whole story. This whole idea about what we are, how we exist. Different qualities we have. We have this name. We have this age. We exist in this place. So this is all those qualities, and that person, it exists. It's not just something created by my mind. And it really, it's the existence of me as a person, it really doesn't even depend upon my mind. It just is. It's just a fact, right? As a person, I just am there. So that's the kind of, and it appear as if, like, when you ordinarily think of yourself without analyzing, does it appear as if the person who is you, does that person appear to be composed of a lot of parts, of constituent parts? Not really, no. It just seems like, yeah, there's just one person. It's there. I'm just one person, just like that. No, And does it appear as if that person has come into existence in dependence upon many causes and conditions coming together and producing that person? Also, not really. No, it just seems like, yeah, it's just there, like that. It's just the way it is. It just appeared like that. It just is like that. So, so yeah, we have to get a sense of the ordinary appearance. That's why, I mean, it's one of the most difficult things, I think, in meditating on emptiness is keeping separate the mind that's doing the analysis. When we're analyzing to see how I exist, we have to keep that separate from the ordinary mind to which, the ordinary mind to which our sense of self ordinarily appears, right? Because as soon as we start doing the analysis, it's like we're not thinking in a normal way anymore. We're thinking in this more logical, more critical, more skeptical, more like kind of investigative way. Whereas usually in our everyday life, when the object of negation, right, the kind of self that we're trying to discover doesn't exist, usually when it appears, we're not thinking that way. So that's why when you're looking to see, looking to find the kind of self that we're negating, the inherently existent person, it helps to look at times when we have afflictive emotions arising in the mind, right? When we start to generate wisdom analyzing in the mind, it's more difficult to see that kind of inherently existent self, right? So that's why it's I mean, one of the best examples for, the best situations to try to get a sense of the person we're looking at, I mean, the object of negation we're looking for is to think about when someone falsely accused you of doing something wrong. And we have a sense of being defensive. We become defensive, right? That defensiveness, that sense of, that defensiveness, it strongly grasps at an I, at a self. Because what are we defending? We're defending I. How does that I appear to exist? As something without parts, not existing in dependence upon causes and conditions, and not as something that exists in dependence upon imputation by the mind. Right? It doesn't appear to exist like that. It exists as if this I, which you're accusing of doing something wrong, is real, totally real. No, there's no question about the reality of that point. We just take for granted. So it's good to remember times in the past when someone falsely accused us of doing something wrong, or we became upset for some other reason, or we were strongly craving something. Any time in the past when we had a kind of strong afflictive emotion arising, at that time the I we're talking about, the object of negation, more clearly arises, more strong. The stronger the affliction, the stronger that inherently existent I appears. More clearly it appears. So back to, how, yeah. So the person, I mean, we exist as a person. So as a person, how do we exist in dependence upon mental imputation? How do we actually exist is, we observe our body and then we impute I. So especially when we're doing physical actions. If I ask you, where are you? If I ask you, where are you? What are we going to do? We observe the environment we're in, right? And then we say, I'm here. But what do we mean? We mean my body is in this environment, and thereby I say that I'm here, right? So, but maybe a better example is if I ask, are you sitting or standing? Right? So to answer that question, we look at our body, right? Is my body sitting or is my body standing? And then we say, I'm sitting. I mean, I'm sitting now for real. But is my body I? No, of course not, right? My body is not me. Why? Because I think about things. My body doesn't, for example. But there, that itself is an example. So we think about, if I ask you, are you sitting or standing? We look at our body, is our body sitting or is our body standing? And then we say, I'm sitting or I'm standing, whatever the case may be. So at that time, we're labeling I on the body. So are you walking or running? Are you lying down? Are you eating? Do you feel, do you have a lot of energy or do you feel weak? You know, the doctor might ask you, do you feel healthy or do you feel like sick? At all those times, whenever we talk about our physical condition, our physical, what we're doing, we observe our body and then we label I on the body, right? And then it's the same with our mind. If someone asks you, are you happy or sad? To answer that question, we observe our mind. Do I feel happy or do I feel sad? Or I feel bored or sad or whatever. And then we say, I am happy or I am sad. So again, without observing the mind, we can't answer that question. Without observing our body, we can't answer those other questions. So those are examples of how we observe our body or our mind, things that are not us, and then we label I on those. But we identify with those, right? So it's in that way that the I exists. Imagine, could you totally take your body and throw it out the window, just in your imagination, not for real, right? Just take your body and throw it out the window, and then take your mind and throw it out the other window. And then could you remain where you are? Having got rid of your body to one side and having got rid of your whole mind to the other side, and then someone asks you, well, how do you feel? Well, you can't answer that question anymore because you don't have a mind, And then as someone asks you, well, are you sitting or standing? And you're like, well, I just threw my body out the window. So I don't know. I can't really answer that question anymore, right? It doesn't make any sense to answer those questions without having a body and mind. So if we got rid of our body and our mind totally, if the person inherently exists, right, it means that as a person, we exist not depending upon our aggregates, not depending upon our body and mind, not depending upon parts, not depending on causes and conditions. So if the person inherently exists, then, for the person to do whatever it does, to be however it is, happy or sad, excited or bored, sitting or standing, it doesn't need the body and mind. It doesn't depend upon those. But we can see anything about how we are as a person. It all depends upon, this relationship with the body and mind. So, but what is it that makes the connection between the parts of us, our aggregates, and the person that exists? Is mental imputation, the act of imputing, right? It's kind of like the act of identifying with, the act of labeling. We look at if I ask you, are you sitting or standing? We look at what our body is doing and we label I'm sitting. So that's how the mental projection works. I look at this thing, this collection of parts, and I label mug. Thereby mug exists. Just to give another example, I found there's a new book that came out a few years ago called Why Buddhism is Right, I think it's called, written by one, American. It has to be written by an American, right, to give a title like that. One American professor professor at a university in Pennsylvania, actually. Why Buddhism is Right. I saw there's some nice YouTube videos where he's interviewed about his book. So in one of the interviews, he gives a very nice example, which he gives in his book, about how, which is a very helpful example. So it's like he had a nice, has a house with a yard with a lawn. He has a house with a yard with grass in the yard, very nice green grass, that he's very attached to. He likes to mow his lawn and keep it green and pull out all the weeds. So there's one particular kind of plant, a weed, that kept growing up in his yard year after year. And he's very upset about it. And he's tried to do all kinds of things to get rid of that weed, different kinds of poison, pulling it out, putting different kinds of insects in the yard so they eat that weed so it doesn't grow. So over, several years, he has this very strong relationship with this plant where it's like his enemy, it's a weed. And then he went on a Vipassana retreat in the forest somewhere in Connecticut or something, New York in the forest. And then he's walking, he's learning about emptiness, trying to practice mindfulness, walking through the forest. And suddenly he sees one of that same plant growing in the forest. And like the sun is, the the sun is kind of shining through the leaves of the forest and the air is cool and it's beautiful, you know, it's like sunset. And he sees the same plant that he's been trying to destroy in his yard for years. And he realizes it's not a weed. From the side of the plant, it's not a weed. It's just another plant trying to grow and survive and thrive like all plants in the world. But independence upon his lawn and his desire not to have other things than grass growing in his lawn, then he's been labeling it weed and just seeing it exclusively as a bad thing, right? But from the side of the object, it's not a bad thing. It's actually not a weed, right? But so the question is, well, is it a weed or not? Well, we can say, yeah, it is. I mean, in one context, you label a thing as weed, and independence upon that context and that act of labeling, it is a weed, right, in that context. And it's not that it doesn't exist as a weed. It is a weed in one way, right? But you can look at it in a different way, like the second way you looked at it, and see, well, actually, yeah, it's being a weed in that context of a thing growing in grass that you don't want growing in your grass. That's not the only kind of reality of it. And it's not an inherent aspect of that plant, right? Just like, I mean, this mug, like this is I used this example before, I kind of like it. This mug, like, okay, as long as I use it to drink things out of, it's a mug. But what if I drop it and I break the handle off one time, and then I just start keeping pens and pencils in it, right? And for years, I just keep pens and pencils and erasers and rubber bands and paper clips in this thing. Then is it a mug anymore at that point? No, not really, no. Like here, I'll give you a better example. Actually, I have this. Like this is a jar. It used to have, I don't know, Vegemite or something in it. But now, well, it's still a jar, but it's not like a food container anymore. It just holds my pens and pencils. It's a pencil holder now. So, yeah, in that way things exist. You know, well, anyway, I shouldn't go on. We should go through these verses. I could go on and on and on. Okay, perception. So there's the next question. Thinking that animal sacrifice, sun worship, created God is a path to liberation. All right, there's another question. I think I could just answer quickly. How does ignorance grasping at inherent existence underlie the wrong views of thinking that animal sacrifice, sun worship, creator God, etc. is a path to liberation? How does getting rid of the first get rid of the other wrong views? If there is time to address this, since it is not directly related to any of His Holiness verses. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, they all vary a little bit. Yeah, maybe I'll leave it because that does require some explanation, and I'm not totally clear how to go about it just right off. So maybe I'll try to come back to that question. Okay, then this is the other thing, which, yeah, also, so this is Holiness spent some time explaining these 4 absurd consequences of holding that things inherently exist by Chandrakirti in the Entrance to the Middle Way and Chandrakirti's auto commentary on it. So His Holiness went through these 4 verses today. There are 4 absurd consequences. Maybe I'll just briefly explain the second one. Yeah, and then let's meditate on emptiness a little bit then. So the second consequence is this, that the absurd consequence that conventional truths would be able to withstand analysis. Well, actually, I spoke about that one yesterday, so let's talk about the first one. The absurd consequence that an Arya's so if things inherently existed, there would be the absurd consequence that an Arya being's meditation or meditative absorption would be the cause for destroying things. So what does it mean? So as Chandrakirti says, if the intrinsic characteristic of things were to arise dependently, so remember, the intrinsic characteristic of things is the object of negation. It's another synonym with existing from its own side or inherently existing. So if the intrinsic characteristic of things were to arise dependently, things would become to be destroyed by denying it. Emptiness would then be a cause for the destruction of things. But this is illogical. So no real entities exist, right? So if the intrinsic characteristic of things were to arise dependently, things would come to be destroyed by denying it. What did His Holiness explain? Hold on, I'm going to look at the Tibetan on this, just to get a little more clear. 저래랑 기침 땡겨나 내가 꼬로에 뭐고 집도죠. Yeah. Okay. Basically, it's like this. So imagine this, right? So an Arya being meditating on emptiness, right? What they see, well, you know what? So an Arya being means someone who's directly realized emptiness. They have a direct perception, a yogic direct perceiver that sees emptiness. So just like we see the palm of our hand in front of us with our eyes, that's a direct perceiver. So someone who's they first conceptually realized emptiness and then meditated on it again and again and again, gradually they generate a non-conceptual mind, realizing emptiness. So this yoga direct perceiver, at the time they're directly realizing emptiness, directly seeing emptiness with their mind, then at that time, what they realize is that nothing inherently exists whatsoever. Nothing exists from its own side. There is no existence from its own side whatsoever. That completely, so things existing from their own side, things independently existing, things inherently existing, that is like a sky flower. That's like a flying pig. That is like horns of a rabbit. It totally does not exist, right? So what he's saying is if the intrinsic characteristics of things were to arise dependently. So if things, basically he's saying, if things had intrinsic nature, if things inherently existed, right? If they had inherent existence, then when the Arya being searches to see, if there is inherent existence and they find that it's not, things would come to be destroyed by denying. So when the Aryas destroy, so in the face of that yoga direct perceiver, they've destroyed inherent existence. So of course, for our own school, the consequentialist middle way school, it's not that there was inherent existence and then Aryas do this kind of, Arya beings, we do this kind of mental analysis and we cause inherent existence to stop being, not like, like if I take my mug and smash it and it stops existing, it's like first it did exist and then it doesn't exist. So when we meditate on emptiness, it's not like that, right? It's not like there was inherent existence and then we do some analysis and we destroy it. Not like that. Rather, from beginningless time until now, nothing has ever had inherent existence. Nothing has ever existed from its own side, and we're just newly discovering that. So what he's saying here, though, but if things had intrinsic nature, right, then when an Arya being when an Arya being meditates on emptiness and sees that there is no intrinsic nature, it would be the same as destroying things. It would be that like causing that things go out of existence. So emptiness, so that's what the third line says. Emptiness would then be, or meditation on emptiness would then be a cause for the destruction of things, right? So instead of just seeing that things are empty of an intrinsic nature, if intrinsic nature, that was the nature of things, and then Arya beings see that actually that doesn't exist, it would be the case that they not only negate this sort of fabrication that was a projection of ignorance, but they negate the existence of things itself, right? But that's totally illogical, right? So therefore, no real entities. So real entities is again a synonym for inherent existence. no real entities exist. Yeah. Yeah, that's the logic here. So His Holiness again said, His Holiness has mentioned these 4 absurd consequences every day for 3 days in a row, right? And he's quoted all 4 verses here, A, B, C, D. He's quoted all 4 verses every day. And he said, every day he has said, I recite these every day. I meditate on these every day. I find these extremely helpful. But these verses are not easy. I mean, I still find them difficult to kind of use. So, so we'll skip over them. That's the easy way out. To the last one. Yeah, so this is the last verse His Holiness mentioned on meditating on emptiness. This is another verse by Nagarjuna from Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. So it says, I am neither one with the aggregates nor different from the aggregates. The aggregates are not dependent on me. I am not dependent upon the aggregates. I don't possess the aggregates. What else am I? So I was just describing where we think of how the I ordinarily appears when someone falsely accused us of doing something wrong and we felt defensive, and look at how the I appears that time. Or another way is to think about questions like, what am I doing? Am I sitting or am I standing? Think about that, questions about physically what you're doing. Where am I? Am I sitting? Am I standing? Do I feel healthy? Do I feel sick? Do I feel strong? Do I feel weak? Or questions about your mental well-being. You know, what am I thinking about? Do I feel happy? Or do I feel sad? So when you ask those kind of questions and just let natural responses arise, but kind of direct your attention towards the person, right, that you're referring to. How does that person seem to appear? Right, so why don't we take a moment now and just do that. Either think of a time you were falsely accused of doing something wrong and you felt defensive, or ask some of those other questions and try to see how do you ordinarily appear to yourself without analyzing. Okay, so that way we ordinarily appear, we have to keep that in mind, right? That is what we're looking for. So the big challenge with doing the analysis described in this verse and other verses is that when we start looking for how that person might exist, we lose a sense of what we're looking for, right? Because when we start doing the analysis, we lose a sense of how we ordinarily appear. So when you're doing the analysis and you start to forget about what you're looking for in the first place, you have to come back to this first step, right? Again and again. So we want to go through, there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 different possibilities listed in this verse, right? There's 2 in the first line, 2 in the second line, and 1 in the third line. So in the first line, I am neither one with the aggregates, that's the first, nor different from the aggregates. So we analyze, am I one with the aggregates? So here, aggregates, a simple way to think of it is just your body and mind. Am I one with my body and mind? So first we analyze that. And then the second, am I different from the body and mind? Then the third, the aggregates are not dependent upon me. So we ask, are the aggregates dependent upon me? And then the fourth, am I dependent upon the aggregates? Right? It says, nor am I dependent upon the aggregates. So this is here, it's kind of stated in the way of the final conclusion, but we have to actually ask the question to do the analysis. Nor am I dependent on the aggregates, and then I don't possess the aggregates. What else am I? Yeah, so let's just start with the first one. So again, get a sense of how you ordinarily appear to yourself by thinking, like we're doing the first step we just did. Being falsely accused, being upset about something, or just thinking about yourself. What am I doing? How do I feel? Different ways. So then we ask, is that person, is it one with my body and one with my mind, or one with both my body and mind? Right. So that person, is it one with the aggregates? So to be one with the aggregates would mean it's not different from the aggregates, not different from our body and mind. So if it's one with the body and mind, because the body and mind are two things, then that self would be two things, right? Not one thing. So that's already a contradiction. But then you might take the two aggregates separately. Is the self one with the body? So if it's one with the body, obviously it is the body. But we're not a physical thing, right? We're not a body. So that doesn't make sense. Is myself one with the mind? That's appealing to many people, right? But if the self that we're looking for, if it's one with my mind, it means that it doesn't make sense to speak about my mind, right? Just the phrase, my mind, it entails that there's a person, me, who has something, a mind, and that those are two different things, right? So if the self is one with the mind, then it doesn't make sense to speak of my mind. And do we have a mind? Like, we wouldn't be able to ask that. We would be, when we talk about mind, we would just be talking about me. It would be the same thing, talking about mind and me, because the mind and the self would be the one. It would be one thing. So then, yeah, I mean, each of these different analysis, you have to spend a lot of time and do again, each one. But anyway, we just try to get a taste now of each one. So again, we'll go back to the first step. What's the person? How do we ordinarily appear to exist? Especially, right? And when we have afflictive emotions arising, anger, attachment, and so forth. So if that person is not one with the aggregates, then is it different from the aggregates? So remember, if it's different from the aggregates, here we're talking about inherently existing person. Right? So if it's because the way we appear to exist is as existing from our own side, inherently existing. So if we're inherently different from the aggregates, it means, like what I was talking about before, you could throw your body out one window and throw your mind out the other window, totally put your body and mind off to one side and totally separate from those, independent from those. There should be something remaining that we can point to and say, this is I. So check if you can do that. This I that seems to appear independently from its own side in the first step. Can you totally separate out the body and mind and totally apart from those, separate from those, find that I? So one problem that arises is that because you've separated out your mind, you don't even have a mind to realize I anymore, right? If the I somehow exists separate from your mind, then what is it that's even conscious, right? When you talk about the I being aware and knowing something, if it doesn't, if it exists separately from your mind, then how can it even understand or know anything? Yeah, and in fact, it would also be the case with the relation to other people. Here, His Holiness mentioned one reasoning which I hadn't thought about much before. I don't remember hearing, but it's like, you know, if the I, the person, existed separately from our body and mind, then we should be able to say, like now we can say, you know, someone asks you, are you a human being? You say, yes, I'm a human being. If they ask you why, you might say, well, because I have one head, I have two eyes, a nose, hands, and arms, because my parents are human beings, because I can, you know, I can speak human language. I can do all the things that, sorry, I should stop sharing my screen, because I can do all the things that human beings do. But if we separate out if you know, the I exists separate from our body and mind, then are you a human being anymore? You know, what would be the basis then for saying that you're a human being? Because you can't refer to your body, right? So you can't say, well, because I have one head and two arms and legs, and you can't refer to your mind. You can't say, because I think like a human being or something, because you have to exist separately from those. So there's nothing you can point to say, yeah, I'm a human being, or I am who I am, right? Because you can't refer to those things. So if the person exists in isolation from the aggregates, then it's impossible to distinguish the person as a human or an animal or a deva or a hell being or any of those things anymore, right? But apart from those kinds of beings, there are no persons, right? So it doesn't make any sense. Again. And then let's do the third analysis here. The aggregates are not dependent on me, right? So, well, I mean, yeah. So it means the body and mind, they're not dependent upon, what is this one? Oh, Pomen Pombolation and Dela Pome, Derdene. So it means the aggregates are not dependent upon this inherently existent I. Yeah, I don't think we won't take time to meditate on these because we're running out of time. But I'll just explain briefly. It means the aggregates, if we exist in totally separate from our aggregates, in isolation from our aggregates, then the aggregates cannot have any relationship with us whatsoever. So they cannot depend upon us, right? Because as soon as our aggregates depend upon us, then we also depend on them. And that's counter to this ordinary appearance we have. And then finally, nor am I dependent upon the aggregates. So if we existed as if we had inherent existence, we could not depend upon the aggregates in any way. So it's kind of similar to the first one. And then finally, I don't possess the aggregates. So if we existed separately from, independence from our aggregates, or if we had inherent existence, then we could not possess aggregates, right? Because as soon as we possess something, we're a person who possesses that. That thing is something that's possessed by us. We're interdependent with that thing we possess. We have a relationship with that thing we possess. We exist in dependence upon the thing we possess. So if we exist inherently in this way we ordinarily appear to, then we cannot possess the aggregates. We cannot be the possessor of our aggregates. But this, I mean, it should bring up a big question in your mind, because there is, I mean, another very confusing thing about this whole thing. There's a big difference between searching for, well, I mean, the most important step is the first step, where we identify the object of negation. So it means we identify the way we ordinarily appear to exist, that is false, right? And that kind of existence that we negate when we do this analysis. So that's called identifying the object of negation. That's like the hardest step, really. Once I do that well, the rest of it's quite easy. But what's so hard about that step is, for us, well, first of all, it's not that we don't exist at all. There is a person that exists, right? As a person, we do exist. And the way that the ordinary person does exist, and the way the object of negation appears, those two appear as totally mixed, right? Now, before we realize emptiness, it's almost impossible to separate out the appearance of the person that does exist, and the appearance of the object of negation, right? The inherently existent person which doesn't exist. Those two appear as totally mixed. So when we're doing this kind of meditation, if we just look back at the verse, we have to keep in mind that those two are separate. Many people will mix up because the ordinary, the person, the merely imputed person. This is important phrase His Holiness used again and again. The merely imputed I, the merely imputed person, which does exist. That one, of course, that one, you can, if you do the analysis in relation to that one, it's totally different, right? That merely imputed person is not one with the aggregates. Okay, that's the same. That merely imputed person is different from the aggregates, right? So that's clear in the second part here, when it says, I am not different from the aggregates. Clearly, he's talking about the inherently existent I, the I which is the object of negation, right? The I that appears to, the I that the I that seems to exist from its own side, right? So that one is not different from the aggregates. But the merely imputed I, it's different from the aggregates, but it exists independent upon the aggregates, right? It's merely imputed on the aggregates. So yeah, anyway, you have to keep that in mind. There's a big difference between the merely imputed I, which does exist, versus the inherently existent I, which seems to be not merely imputed by the mind. Okay. Any questions about that whole part, meditation on emptiness? No, I'm taking no. That's my takeaway from this long silence. My takeaway is no. Okay, let's look at. I'll try to say something about B's question very quickly. How does inherent grasping at ignorance of grasping at inherent existence underlie the wrong views of thinking that animal sacrifice, sun worship, a creator god are paths to liberation? Okay, actually that's easy. I didn't think of it before. Because like this, once we correctly identify ignorance grasping at inherent existence, B, then we see how that ignorance is related to attachment, anger, greed, depression, selfishness, all of our afflictive emotions, right? And we see how all of our suffering arises through the force of those afflictive emotions, right? So then we see how, as long as we don't, eliminate those afflictive emotions, then we cannot be free from suffering. Therefore, we see that sacrificing animals, it doesn't help get rid of my afflictive emotions. So it doesn't help get rid of suffering. So it's pointless. It doesn't help me, and it harms animals, right? And then the same with sun worship. That we see that worshiping the sun, it doesn't really help get rid of this fundamental cause of attachment and anger and so forth. And therefore, there's not much point. And also we see that it's not the case that a creator God causes me to suffer, right? It's rather that I create suffering for myself due to basically afflictive emotions, and then through the force of attachment and anger, doing things that harm other sentient beings, creating karma. And therefore, we see that actually this idea that there's a creator God who creates the world, creates me the way I am, creates the experiences I have, we see that actually that's a false idea. Another way to kind of say the same thing is that because if we have an understanding of why grasping at inherent existence is a kind of ignorance, right? It means that we see that grasping at things as inherently existing is a false mind, right? It's a mind that grasps at things as existing in a way that they don't exist. So if we can see that that mind is false, it means that we can see the truth a little bit, that things are dependently arising phenomena, right? When we see that things are dependently arising phenomena, I mean, a big part of that is seeing that, things arise, impermanent things or products, they arise through the force of causes and conditions, right? And we can see that causality, causation, it's not just that anything produces anything. I mean, we can see this in the world around us. I can't I don't know, kill a cat and then make a mug from that, or something like that. I can't take, that's a bad example. I'll use a much more neutral example. Okay, here I have lemons on my desk too. You get to see everything I have on my desk. I can't take lemon seeds and plant them in the ground and get apples, right? Better example. So only certain kinds of causes produce certain kinds of effects. It's not random and chaotic. So once we, by looking deeply at dependent arising, we see how causation works. And thereby we can see that our own happiness arises from virtue, from benefiting other beings. I mean, you reap what you sow. This is taught in Christianity. It's taught in the Bible. Right? You reap what you sow. Like the kind of experiences we have are determined by the kind of experiences we cause others to have. So if we want to be happy, we need to make others happy, do things that are pleasing to others. If we want to suffer, then we should go around harming everybody we know, right? But of course we don't want to suffer, so we should not harm. So once we see that law of cause and effect, then again we realize that, well, if you do animal sacrifice, if you sacrifice animals, you're causing sentient beings to suffer. Therefore, you're creating causes for you to suffer, not for your success, right? If you worship the sun, yeah, I mean, maybe that'll feel good, and it might be beneficial in some ways. I mean, of course it is beneficial, and well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to maybe go right down the line with that argument. I mean, one argument is that sun worship is beneficial in some ways, otherwise it wouldn't have existed for thousands of years. It must bring some kind of peace to people's minds, right? But then the reason I hesitated was because, well, do you also have to say that about animal sacrifice? Because that's also existed for thousands of years. Maybe that it does benefit people's minds in some way. I mean, if you really believe that by sacrificing some animals you're going to have success, then for sure, when you sacrifice those animals, you probably feel good about it, right? You feel like, okay, now things are going to go really well. Might benefit people in that way somehow. I don't know. But if you understand my main point here, so if you understand the law of cause and effect, by understanding how ignorance grasping at inherent existence is a mistaken state of mind, you understand something about dependent arising. Through that, you understand something about law of cause and effect. Through that, you understand that, by harming other creatures, you're ultimately harming yourself. And also that the creator God cannot be omnipotent God, because things arise through the force of, by the power of their appropriate causes and conditions, not by the power of some omnipotent person, right? So that's kind of how that relates to creator God. So yeah, how does getting rid of the first get rid of the other wrong views? Yeah, so that's what I explained. Okay, then if there's no more questions about emptiness, then we'll look at bodhicitta. All right. So yeah, here we are. So these are the verses His Holiness quoted. And again, these first three verses, whatever joy there is in the world, all comes from desiring others to be happy. Whatever suffering there is in the world, all comes from desiring myself to be happy. So that means in a selfish way, with disregard for others. Of course, we desire ourselves to be happy, but we should do so in a way that also includes the well-being of others and includes happiness of future lives, happiness of liberation from samsara, happiness of enlightenment. What need is there to say more? The childish work for their own benefits means alone, exclusively for their own welfare, while the Buddhas work for the benefit of others, right? So they're contrasting selfishness versus altruism. Just look at the difference between them. If I do not actually exchange my happiness for the self of others, right? So it means if I do not exchange this kind of exclusive self-centered attitude, as long as I follow this exclusively self-centered, selfish attitude, I'm just going to make excuses to lie and cheat and harm others and disregard others' welfare and treat others however I want because they don't matter. So as long as we follow that kind of attitude, we're we lose our internet connections. See how bad I've been in the past? My internet doesn't even work. Okay. Okay, just joking. So, yeah. So, just we have to compare here, following our selfish, self-centered attitude versus sincerely caring about others. Now, when we care about others, we're kind towards others, we forgive others, we become more tolerant, we just become more kind, and thereby we're happy. And then other people like us. So other people, we have good relationships, good friendships. Therefore, we easily get employment, all kinds of things. We create merit, right? So we have lots of causes for happiness. We please our spiritual friends, we please our teachers, we please all the Buddhas, we please all the Devas of the white side, and they protect us from harm as well. So if we do not actually, when we say this exchanging self with others, if we do not actually exchange my happiness for the suffering of others, it means we have to stop exclusively caring. We have to stop caring exclusively about our own happiness without regard for others. And rather, we should try to care more about others than about ourselves, right? So to the degree that we care so much about others that we wish that their suffering would ripen up on us so that they don't have to suffer. So we think it doesn't matter if I have to suffer, as long as I can, do something to reduce the suffering of others, that's more important, right? So an excellent example of this is so many healthcare professionals, these days, people who work in intensive care units, doctors and nurses, that they're going, every day they go into these places where we would not want to go, where the risk of getting infected with COVID-19, a potentially lethal disease, is very high. But why do they go? Because they care more about the patients than they do themselves. So I shall not, so as long as we don't have that kind of altruistic concern for others, then not only I shall not attain the state of Buddhahood, Even in cyclic existence, I shall have no joy. And then this last, oh, actually, not quite last verse, second to last verse, also from the Bodhisattva's way of life. So, having mounted, oh, sorry, not the horse, the horse. I knew something's wrong. So, having mounted the horse of an awakening mind that dispels all discouragement and weariness, who, when they know of this mind that proceeds from joy to joy, would ever lapse into despondency, right? So, who in the world at the end of a 2-hour discussion about emptiness would think, I just don't care about meditating on bodhicitta right now. I want this to end. Of course, you wouldn't do that, right? So then this verse, Chandrakirti says, as compassion alone is accepted to be the seed of the perfect harvest of Buddhahood, the water that nourishes it, and the fruit that is long a source of enjoyment, I will praise compassion at the very start of all. So at the beginning of his great work on emptiness, Chandrakirti praises compassion first, very unusual. And then this is the definition of bodhicitta here from the Ornament of Clear Realization by Maitreya. Bodhicitta, the desire for the pure, complete enlightenment, the desire for pure, complete enlightenment in order to achieve the welfare of others. So what is bodhicitta? It is the desire for oneself to achieve Buddhahood. Why? In order to accomplish the welfare of others, right? It means in order to free others from suffering and lead them to the state of perfect happiness. So, without further ado, let's meditate on emptiness a little bit. Make the best offering to the Buddha, honor the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, in the best possible way that we can remember him on this day for coming back to earth after he went to Tushita heaven to teach his mother the Dharma. Right. So these are the main verses, His Holiness, and these three here that are on the screen. So if you want, you can read again. Otherwise, just do your best. Let's meditate on bodhicitta for 5 minutes. Okay, so let's stop there. So let's dedicate our merit briefly. So rejoice in all the effort we put into going through these verses and some of what His Holiness has taught over the last few days. Yeah, sorry I didn't get to finish going through all of the commentary on the Awakening Mind, but I don't know. I encourage you to read the rest of it on your own if you haven't already. Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy to go if you want to do another session sometime. I'm happy to go through it. But, yeah, depends on you guys. Yeah, so let's rejoice in all especially on Lava Pluchen today. Rejoice in the life and teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. And then the Dharma is available to us now, over 2,500 years later, because of countless, people in each generation from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, countless, people who've studied and practiced and taught the Dharma to others from generation to generation down to the present day. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Zopa Rinpoche, other teachers who have spent their lives devoted to studying, practicing, and teaching the Buddha Dharma. So we rejoice in all their effort and all their merit. And then rejoice in one's own efforts and merit, all the positive things one has done in this life and past lives, and that of other sentient beings as well. So all this merit combined together, let's dedicate with. So this is again that's this other document I put together that His Holiness asked the students to meditate on. So there's these 3 verses. She's using these a lot lately. His Holiness didn't mention them in this teaching, but he usually does. So we can dedicate with these. These are 3 verses by Nagarjuna from Precious Garland. So it's basically dedicated to all sentients. Like the earth, water, fire, and wind, like medicines and firewood of the monastery, may I always be enjoyed by all sentient beings, as they like and without resistance. May sentient beings be dear to me like my life, and may they be even more dear to me than myself. May all their ill deeds ripen upon me, and all my virtues ripen upon other sentient beings. Right? So may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, in short, and have every happiness up to full enlightenment through the force of our merits. May the Buddha Dharma flourish and spread in every direction, especially may all the activities of Tushita, Dharamsala, Tushita Meditation Center, Dharamsala, may they flourish and succeed, and may Tushita's activities continually benefit countless beings in the future. Especially may they be able to build, I think, new guest rooms on the hill above the Gompa, and maybe be able to quickly build a 3-dimensional Heruka mandala on top of the Vajrasattva Gompa, and whatever other activities, projects Tushita has. May all the conditions for those to succeed come together, and may all of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's projects and intentions be fulfilled. In all our lives, may we never be separated from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all of our other gurus. And may all of our actions only be pleasing with the holy minds. May all those who have recently deceased or are passing through the bardo take a precious human rebirth, or be born in a pure land where they can meet the Mahayana teachings and a fully qualified Mahayana guru. And may all of our actions, in short, all be only beneficial to sentient beings. For as long as space, let's see. Oh yeah. For as long as, this is that one. So 485 here. For as long as even one sentient being has not been liberated from samsara, even if I could achieve peerless enlightenment, may I abide in samsara for that being, in order to benefit that being. And then for as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. And then any other prayers you have to add to spring to mind, and may those also be fulfilled in accordance with your wishes. Okay. Thank you all very much. You've been a great audience again. Yeah, and I hope we meet again soon. I'm glad you take so much interest in His Holiness teachings. I know it's not easy often, but it's definitely worthwhile, to make effort. So yeah, I hope we
Thank
meet
you
again next
so
time.
much,
Next
Venerable.
month, actually, His Holiness is teaching when, Kunben?
I think in December.
December 3rd to 5th or something like that. Anyway, we'll be back.
Thank you so
Third,
much,
fourth,
Venerable, for facilitating this review sessions.
Okay, thank you, Felipe, for all your help. And
On
hosting.
behalf of all Tushita, and we hope that really you have a very happy love of Duchen and can come again many, many times to help us and
Okay.
teach us more of the Dharma. Thank you so much.
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Yeah,
to all the
great.
attendees as well that are here, and our happy lap of Duchen to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone.
thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye. Thanks.